Hey everyone, welcome to And Security for All. This is the brand new 2025 kickoff show, and I am not Kim. You probably figured that one out. My name is Mitch Main, and I am Director of Cybersecurity Research for Akamai Technologies. And what we're going to do today is one of the things we love to do in the cybersecurity world is analyze things. And when the calendar rolls over from one year to the next, that gives us an excellent opportunity to do what we love to do. So at the end of last year, I wrote an article where I interviewed 6 cybersecurity thought leaders from Akamai Technologies, and I asked them, what stood out to you in 2024, and what do you predict based on that for 2025? I got 6 amazing answers, or actually way more than 6 answers, and I am here with 3 of those thought leaders today, and I'm going to introduce them in a moment. But before I do that, I want to mention that And Security for All has 3 more shows coming up that I want to make mention of. March 20th for Los Angeles, Thursday, January 23rd for Chicago. These are out of order. And Thursday, January 30th. These are FutureCon shows. I'm being corrected midair. Did I mention this is my first time? And Thursday, January 30th in Dallas. So back to interviewing our cybersecurity experts. I have 3 of them with me. Let's bring them on, and I'll introduce them. There you guys are. So first and foremost, we have Roger Barranco, who is Vice President of Security Operations here at Akamai Technologies, and was one of the unfortunate souls that I had I got to interview towards the end of last year. Roger, welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Mitch.
We also have Trisha Howard, who is in our Security Intelligence and Research group, one of the smartest people I know, and she was also interviewed. So Trisha, glad you're here.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And last and certainly not least, for those of you who are regular viewers of this, you may recognize that face, although now it's got some facial hair going on. It's Steve Winterfeld. He is our advisory CISO here at Akamai Technology. Steve, it's good to see your hairy mug, man.
Yeah, it's good to be here. We'll see how long this lasts, but I'm excited about our insights.
All right, me too. So let's just dive into it. Roger, I am going to start with you because you mentioned, let's talk about DNS. You mentioned some pretty potent research stats to kick off your interview, including that DNS was a component of 60% of layers 3 and 4 over just an 18-month period. You also talk, and then I found this keenly interesting. You also talk about the fact that a lot of these are reflector-based attacks, and we can probably avoid those. What are you telling clients about this and how to avoid the pitfalls?
You know, it's interesting. I kind of tie it back to some of the boring pieces of security, which are absolutely critical, like patching. No one wants to talk about patching. You go to RSA, you're walking right past the booth that talks about patching, right? But oh my goodness, how important is that to actually make a difference? And I know this is a minor digression with that, but I think we have time to touch on it quickly. When you look at attack sources, so not the victim, attack sources, they're almost always the US. So yeah, the attacker may be nation state, it may be Eastern Europe, it may be, Asia, certain areas or whatever. Why is that? Because the machines are the most easily compromised and not patched, typically in the States. This ties very much so to the DNS piece of it. So we're protecting the world's largest entities out there. And I'm always stunned, and I shouldn't be by this time, but I am, that DNS continues to be the #1 vector. So whether that's a genuine DNS attack where it's valid query, so it's actually doing real DNS calls, or it's a reflector and it bounces between one and the other because the attackers are extremely smart and they're going to choose the tool that's the most effective. But oh my goodness, after all these years, and after seeing over and over and over, you lose DNS, you lose everything.
Yep.
We are still mortifyingly weak as an entity, the globe, to defend themselves against it. And what's exceptionally sad is 2 things. Number one, it's a really easy problem to solve. It's not net new. It's not, oh my gosh, this is day 0 stuff. This problem, 99.9999% can be solved to where you as a customer or wherever should not even know that you're under attack until you get the attack report later from an entity. And you could talk about the sizes and everything. The other part of it is 50% of those 60% of attacks that we see out there can be totally thwarted if we were good internet citizens and properly configured our DNS not to participate. So there are a massive amount of things that are really easy, well within reach, and incredibly inexpensive, by the way. We're not talking about having to buy massive gear and global balancers and everything to go with it. Sorry, that was a bit long, probably.
No, actually, it's what we wanted. And you know what? You gave me a good idea that I'm going to do for a future article with you. And this is the whole notion of being a good internet citizen. And I see Trisha just basically cheering you on there.
Oh,
So
I love listening to Roger talk always.
So she may be part of that one too. But I want to go to you, Steve, because I know DNS is a favorite topic of yours, and you talked a lot about the record-breaking amount of NX domain attacks along a growing prevalence of layer 7 attacks against both apps and APIs. What would you add to what Roger just told us?
Yeah, and first of all, I echo the cyber hygiene is so critical. But as we look at this and we talk about things like the pseudo-random subdomain attacks, which makes me sound really smart. Really, the common name is probably just water torture attacks, and it's flooding our overwhelming resources with legitimate but malicious DNS requests. And so domain name service is our global phone book, or for those of you who have never seen a phone book, your global GPS. And so, if you want to get to akamai.com, you're not going to type in 1.2.3.4. You're going to type in akamai.com and something has to translate that. Well, if you take that out of the picture, then nobody's getting anywhere.
We'll never find you.
So, yeah, and so that's what we're talking about. It could impact customers getting to you, could impact your employees doing their job. And so whether you're attacking that DNS, whether you're attacking the infrastructure that I used to log into, that layer 3, 4, the web page a customer needs to come in to get to your service, that layer 7, all of this is really around making sure you understand that this problem is not going away. We've had distributed denial of service attacks for a long time. They're growing in speed, how fast they come about, how fast we went from, a low-level attack to a new record in under a minute. You don't have time to respond. You're just off the network. Nobody can get to you.
And wasn't 2024 the one where we saw the overall largest volume of these things in
I was going to say,
ever?
the volume is getting
record
big.
breaking.
We've seen, in Israel, we've seen attacks that have gone not continuous, but a series of attacks over months. We've seen new highs in all 3 of those categories. And finally, the complexity. We've seen some regions get really narrow. We've seen others get really complex. And so really, I want to emphasize, understand if you're able to take the new records. And Akamai's got great blogs on what the records are, so you can tell if you're ready for the new volume of attack. Make sure that you have playbooks, and a lot of people use third party. And make sure you have playbooks that coordinate with that third party. And then finally, do an exercise. This is so critical.
Well, records were made to be broken, and sadly, these are not an exception. All right, switch gears, guys. We are going to talk about Mirai. So, Roger, back to you. You brought up Mirai specifically. I think you were the first one to do it. You called it one of the most interesting attack tools, highly intelligent in how it takes over endpoints and locks out other actors. You also mentioned that we saw a lot of Mirai about 5 years ago, and then it sort of seemed to drop off the edge of the earth. Here we are again yesterday. We're back to yesterday. Is this classic cybersecurity, everything old is new again? What do you think the future is for Mirai?
Yeah, I'm pretty passionate about the Mirai piece of it. I'll get to that in 1 second. I just wanted to close off on the DNS thing really quick.
Absolutely.
For everybody, people talk about world record attacks and difficulty. And these are not hard attacks, but I've seen global enterprises, huge, with massive DNS handling infrastructure on their edge, get knocked over with 25 meg.
Oh, ouch.
25 meg worth of traffic, because there are a lot of requests within that. So it goes well. You can be horribly hurt by any size attack, so long as you are susceptible to the vector. Now, speaking of a wonderful attack that I am impressed by is Mirai. And yeah, there's no doubt if we went back several years ago, Mirai was the bane of my existence and the whole team. Why? Because it was so malleable. It could grow. It was smart. The attackers were brilliant that were running it to the degree. This worked out to our advantage because Mirai had a component that when an endpoint, a refrigerator, a camera on your house, or whatever was compromised to be able to participate in that attack gets taken over, the bad guys or gals, Trisha, would lock those devices out so that other bad guys couldn't come in and take them over. They wanted to reserve that attack capacity to themselves. That worked massively to our advantage because it subdivided the overall power that could have been derived if they were to leverage all of the Internet of Things, all of those endpoints that they could have taken advantage of. But the way Mirai not only participates in the attack, it also looks for new vulnerable endpoints and takes them over. So on its own, it can grow and propagate. And then the really, I'll say, cool part of it that I hold a lot of respect for with this attack vector or capability is that the attacker can change the attack very quickly. So if we go back even, a little further back in history, attacks were one or two vectors. It was coming out. It was, a sledgehammer coming at you very hard with the attack. It rarely morphed at speed. When Mirai came out, it was able to morph quickly. So the attacker could say, oh, I see that they put a new defense in place that's effective. I can now change that a little bit. It is now effective again. So we know that part of our success in the past certainly was, hey, we have SLAs, we can stop the attacks very quickly that we're seeing, but the attacker makes a change and we do it again and again and again. And we found out that, hey, a really good attacker changes all the time, but they're human and they get worn out. So attackers years ago would go away because they had to sleep, and because they found out, hey, I'm wasting my time. I'm not getting an ROI on my expenditure of effort or bot money to compromise these edges to go after this particular customer. That today, now when we talk more recently with, I'll lightly use the term AI. I know there's a lot of arguing about what's AI and not AI.
We're going to get there in a minute, trust me.
Okay.
Thanks for putting that in.
Leveraging that automation and removing the dependency on a human to recognize effectiveness and changing the bot has made a huge swing also. And so we've been, Trisha, Steve, myself, we've all been warning for a lot of years. I think we were, one of the very few out that were saying that I don't know why Mirai wouldn't come back. It is a capability that is still out there. And for years, it was very rarely seen. But yes, last year, a little bit into the previous year, big resurgence of that tool that I have a lot of respect for, like I said.
Trisha, we are going to pull on you here because I know you specifically have a report. Well, we have a report. Let's be honest. We both, have been writing on this thing since before Christmas. We have a report coming out early February that talks about a lot of the botnet families, and we look at Mirai specifically. And I know you were involved in that research. So, pulling on you, what are your thoughts here? What are you thinking about what Roger just said?
So first off, I totally agree with Roger on the comments about it being a favorite of attack tools. Mirai, if you're unaware, Mirai was actually created initially to kick people off of Minecraft servers, which is why it's one of my favorite
Game?
little. Yeah. Yes.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yes.
I
And
did not know that.
yeah, it's because you wouldn't think so. It's this botnet family has been responsible for some of the most notorious attacks, and yet it was created with an attacker motivation that you wouldn't probably not necessarily consider unless you are in Minecraft, and then you absolutely understand why they did it. But it was simple and yet agile, and I think that to Roger's point, it was one of the easier ones to play around with and manipulate for an attacker. And that is how it has been able to become what it has become today. We see so many variants of it. There was one we saw last year that was still going off of the Corona 2020, like COVID idea. They had named it the coronavirus Mirai botnet. So it is extremely agile, and it is a way for attackers to use what is already there, to the point about ROI, what is already there, and just play with it to do what they want. And we'll get later into attacker motivation, but I think it's important. Mirai has been a really big agent of change for depending on the motivation of the attacker and the operator behind it. It's one of my favorites also.
I gotta say that just the name alone wants to make me crack a Mariah Carey joke, but I'm just gonna leave you. I'm gonna, well, it's the all you want for Christmas, right, thing, and it's like it just doesn't go away. It's like a freaking song. Yes. Okay. There we go. So Mariah is not going away. Hey, did we lose Steve? We may have lost Steve. Uh-oh.
I think we may have. Let me take a second of his time.
He's back. It's too late.
He's back.
It's always DNS. It's always DNS.
Right. In some very much vehement support of what Tricia is saying. If I don't know that the audience will gather this, but if we were to say, hey, we protect the world's largest banks, entities, governments, all the people that you would think that would be at the highest risk level, guess what vertical is by far the most attacked? What Tricia said, is games.
Yep.
That's where we see those attacks first, where we cut our teeth on what mitigations are appropriate and what months later we may see against a large organization.
Yes, there was another botnet that we worked on. If it wasn't last year, it was the year before. That was also created to attack Grand Theft Auto and kick people out of servers there. So, it's really common. And gamers by default tend to be a little bit more tech savvy. So that's a huge vector. Oh yeah.
All right, guys, I'm going to switch topics and go back to Steve. Steve, I want to talk about nation states with you because you mentioned something particularly interesting about DDoS attacks evolving to geopolitical tools employed by nation states and hacktivists. So you saw that happen in 2024, and I want you to tell us what you think that is going to mean for 2025.
Yeah, we've continued to see this. It's been evolving and just getting more and more egregious. A lot of this is driven by geopolitical wars or activities. And so what we've seen is people that have traditionally been cyber criminals are now becoming, involved in political objectives. And my example is always going back to the concept of a pirate back in the day of the sailing ships becoming a privateer and being commissioned by a nation state to be part of their armada.
A hired gun.
And so now somebody who was a criminal is in a certain country, pick Russia, and now Russia's saying, hey, we want you to, on our behalf, conduct denial of service attacks or pick your flavor of attack. And it's almost like, if we did a political sanction against their banks, and all of a sudden we're getting denial of service attacks against ours. And if you look in the section that Richard wrote in the blog about the increase in attacks in EMEA, it really is. So Europe and the Middle East, and that's where we've seen a lot of these new ones. I mentioned, there's Israelis that have had, a series of attacks lasting, 90 days. And so, just when you recover, you're being attacked again. And so I think this has really changed the landscape because, used to be, I didn't think I was going to be attacked by a nation state, and now I'm collateral damage. So I need to be ready to play on that field.
Roger, let's go to you on this one because you also talked about this, specifically about activity, nation state activity, criminal activity motivated not necessarily by financial gain, which is how we think of cyber criminals, but purely by a desire to cause damage. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And it is cyclical, like you alluded to, several minutes ago, with what attack is being used and where the benefit is. It also rotates between social activism and political activism. But you can see, tying it back to what we see on the front lines and how it's different. And you can sometimes get a tell on what nation state is involved. So, for example,
fingerprints.
You can infer certain things. So, not to poke anybody in the eye at all.
Do it.
But the Russian incentivized individuals typically plan better into the future. So for example, the Ukraine incursion, we were seeing a massive increase in cyber activity 3 months ahead of the physical incursion.
Yeah.
When we look at what happened in Israel, it was the day of. There was no advanced activity on the cyber front that was measurable. There's always attacks in that area, obviously, but it wasn't a big start with that.
What do you think that was?
That was just a lot of that aligned with what we saw frequently on the news with that, right? And there were just a lot of, that was a mix of nation state and social activism.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Collaborating, right? Just wasn't one or the other. And usually it is one or the other that's trying to line those pieces up. Another really good example is the APAC, Asia, the New Zealand, Australia area. Most recently, the moment they showed military alignment with the Ukraine, got absolutely crushed. And some significant downtime occurred.
And that shows, the recon was done beforehand.
Yeah,
that was poised and ready. The recon was done beforehand silently. There's a difference between hacktivists that have been empowered and, cyber units that are following a doctrinal program.
Yes.
And I think that's where you can see these radical shifts between, those that are doing cyber warfare and those that are doing hacktivism.
Yeah. And, I'd love to hear, Mitch, if you don't mind, from Tricia a little bit on this, because I don't think that this is not a rocket science type statement, but we have seen nothing from the nation state capability front. Why would they show their capability, right? I guarantee you that they are holding back some massive, massive capabilities out there on the cyber side, as well as Europe and different countries in the US, right? Everybody has their capabilities, but I'm telling you now, I guarantee you that we've seen nothing yet, but I'm interested to hear on the threat research side, Tricia, what you're hearing.
Oh yeah, I would say usually, at least what we can talk about publicly, of course, you're right. I think it's one of those things. I mean, if you go back to, I think it was 2023 now, the Outlook vulnerability that was just took the industry by storm that came out of Russia. Which, if you're not familiar, an attacker could send a crafted calendar invite that had a custom sound notification, and that custom sound notification was actually a file path that gave full command and control to the other side. And I'm really disgustingly simplifying this. We have a much better write up, or several write ups actually, because we found a couple of bypasses to this patch. But that was a good example of something that they're creative. Attackers are creative, and especially if they are being employed at a nation state level, they are very creative. And not only are they very creative and very in a technical sense, but they also have a lot of money behind them. These nation states are not hurting for money. This is their job. A nation state attacker wakes up every single day and goes, instead of logs into Akamai.com, they're trying to log into the back end of that. So there's and this is why I think understanding attacker motivation is very, very important, because the hacktivists, they may not necessarily be going after the money, but they might use that as a way to get on the news. So understanding what they're looking for is very important. But yeah, I agree with you, Roger. The things that we know only makes it more scary to think about what we don't.
One of the things this reminds me of is we were always told when we were in college, right? It's like your connections and your community is gonna really make big things for you. So have a good one. Well, this is the same thing applies to cyber criminals, right? It's like all about connections and all about community, and we're seeing them use that same philosophy in a really nefarious way, which does scare the pants off me. But we're going to change topics a little bit. I want to talk about regulation. Steve, I know this is a big one for you. In the article, you got a little philosophical on me, man. You quoted Anu Bradford, and you used that to sort of frame your points about new regulations, cyber materiality, DORA, Chinese data security law. What do you anticipate seeing on the regulation front in 2025? Because this is going to be an interesting one to watch, just simply because it's going to be so dang complex.
Well, and the threat is often driving a lot of this, and so it's reaction. For companies operating in multiple geographic regions, it's hard to have a single compliance strategy. We'll look at things that are basically being reacted to, and that's where I think we need to focus. So right now, API is driving transformation. And so I expect to see more and more regulation coming out around API. And so, now's your opportunity to make sure you have a sound strategy, both to show how you're securing it and to keep those artifacts. The next is generative AI or large language models. And that's where we're headed. That's where a lot of the transformation is going to be over the next 2 years. And so if you have a large language model that's part of your business model, then you need to figure out how to be able to respond to regulation that's coming. And we've already seen that regulation coming out of the EU. And so typically we see, the threats like ransomware were driving Security and Exchange Commission to come out with reporting requirements around cyber. We saw back when MageCart came out attacking our JavaScript environment, PCI regulations changed to encompass that. Overall, I would emphasize that, again, Europe tends to focus on protecting the citizens, and then we'll see in the US, we'll see different states start to adopt those. So we have more of a scattered approach here in the state, but more of a free market driven. And then finally, China and some of those nations are more about protecting the country, protecting the country, not necessarily the citizens. So as you think about this, those are the kind of frameworks you're going to respond to and need to build that into your program.
All right, so you brought up two very important topics that I want to get to as well, and we're halfway through already. I can't believe it. And that is APIs, and the other one is AI. So I want to go back to you on this one. You talked in the article a lot about APIs. I want you to share your perspective on how you think API risk is going to continue to be a critical concern. OWASP didn't it just come out with the top 10 attack vectors for large language models? Wasn't that fairly recent?
So OWASP, the Open, is basically a nonprofit organization that's focused on protecting internet and gives advice on what are the most common threats.
Yeah,
so
I gave you two questions. Sorry, Steve.
That you can prioritize. And so what they do is they publish these top 10 lists of focus on these 10 threats first, because they're the most commonly attacked. So their first 10 were around web attacks. It makes me very sad to say those haven't changed much over time. So we're not getting a lot better, but they are the first ones you should start with. And then as APIs became more popular, there are different attack vectors. You have things like business logic abuse, which is nowhere in that web page protections. And so that's the second 10 OWASP. And then recently there was a large language model top 10.
Yeah, there we go.
And that was for generative AI, large language. That was changed within almost 18 months, I think. And now there's a 2025 version. And so across all of those, the first thing is you have to have visibility. You can't protect what you don't know about. The second is you have to have the right skill sets. Right now, I don't know how many people on my team can talk about business logic abuse, when I talk about APIs. And then when I go over to large language models, how many people can operate in that environment and understand some of those kind of attacks. So, and then finally, you need validation mechanisms. So, DDoS is going to work against APIs. It's going to work against large language models. It's going to work against all of that. And then others are very unique to that model. So I'll go back to your question and see if I covered most of what you were looking for.
Yeah, I just wanted to take a look at APIs, how that's going to increase, how risk there is going to increase over 2025. And I actually wanted to get to this large language model thing too, which I think you covered both. But I want to pull on Roger here really quickly because I know that you are big into APIs as well. What would you add here for what are you expecting to see in 2025?
Most of the time when we're talking about security, whether that's infrastructure, microsegmentation, or it's edge, WAF, DDoS, it's all kind of this edge parameter or perimeter to prevent inbound. The extreme weakness with API is that it ties back to your SDLC and the capability of your software developer. So Steve kind of touched on this. They may develop in unintentionally a weakness that no amount of front-end security is going to be able to initially prevent. You can do a good job. You can get way ahead of it. You can put some controls. You can at least put some alerting behind it. And let me give you just a really quick example. Very large entity out there that gets the business call that says, every time someone wants to open an account with us, they have to enter a credit card in there, and it costs us money to go ahead and create all of these users. And I know that these users are just trying to get access to us, and they're not real users that want to uptake their product. So the business side and the front-end developer said, hey, I have a really good idea. What if the first thing that I do is do a credit card validity check before I allow them to create their credential for that entity? Well, that costs the business, 25 cents to go back to the credit card vendor every single time, first of all. Second of all, that entity just created a wonderful way for the bad actor who has this massive list of possibly good credit cards to just throw that list at that weak API and have that weak API validate or invalidate. Now a list that maybe costs $10 is now worth tens of thousands of dollars to sell to bad actors out there that want those bad credit cards. And this entity was so big, I don't know if they care, but it probably cost them $50,000 just in that 25 cents at a time, checking the validity
over time. Yeah.
Wow.
So that's just one quasi silly, but absolutely real example of why APIs are hard to protect and why you need specialization to do so.
Well,
and I would add to that the other one is it is designed to automate and be quick and easy.
Yep.
Yes.
And so a little error where they're able to pull down somebody's information, now they're pulling down entire aggregated databases of all your information, and it's illegitimate use of a legitimate API call is now causing a data breach, and you're now basically in the headlines as a cyber incident. And so again, I go back to that situational awareness. You've got friends, frenemies, and enemies. You want your friends to come in and get that information. If you're a travel site, you want people to come in and get that travel information for your hotel or for your airline. If if you have a competitor coming in and getting that information and leveraging that against you, you want to control that and minimize that. If you have hackers coming in, you want to prevent it. And so across all of this, just like with bots, you've got to manage it really closely.
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of echoes of Christmas past on bots too. Trisha, I want to talk to you a little bit about APIs too. It's like, what do you foresee for 2025 based on these two rather dire, I should say, continued predictions, right? This is like these are what we've seen in 24.
Sure. I mean, I think APIs are particularly scary just because of the sheer amount of data that they're traversing over, and also visibility. I think it was Steve who hit on this. It's impossible to secure what you can't see. But with APIs, you're not only talking about what's in your environment, you're also talking about every other API that you interact with that you have no control over. Whether that is, you might not even know it's an API. From an end user perspective, you may have no idea. We learned the hard way that our gateway was actually managed, who is managed by the carrier, that all we were getting was a readout of an API callback whenever we were trying to set up proxy stuff. So you may not even know that you're talking to an API. So if you don't even know that you're talking to it, how are you supposed to secure that? And then we get into the whole shared responsibility model, which we've been talking about a lot on the cloud side, but the APIs so much more traverses that. So it's very scary. I think they also open up new vectors with threats that have been long past, that now make something that was not even relevant 10 years ago completely relevant and can do things that it absolutely should not. Suddenly your video camera is one of these digital undead going after shutting the internet down. You had no idea that your camera could even do that. Why? Because of a vulnerability that wasn't even assigned a CVE 10 years ago. But now with the introduction of APIs and other technology like LLMs, generative AI, etc., now the old threats are becoming new. I think you said this at the very top, Mitch. Old threats are becoming new again because of that. Even threats that shouldn't have been a threat to begin with. What? That's scary.
I read a survey online. We're talking a little bit too about you, Steve. You mentioned visibility about zombie APIs, right? This is like people don't really know how much is out there. And I read a report recently, and I'm not going to name the name because you guys will have the same reaction as me, where they interviewed a couple of really large scale companies, and one of the questions was, how many APIs do you have out there? And the answers were hovering in the 400 range. What do you guys think of that number?
Yeah, you have zombie APIs, which are APIs that were stood up and people forgot about them. So they're no longer monitored. They're no longer patched. All that hygiene Roger was talking about earlier, nobody's doing that because they forgot about them.
Yep.
And so they become zombies. Or you have ghost ones, where somebody went in and stood up a new API on a cloud infrastructure that's tied back into your infrastructure, and so essentially created a backdoor, like Trish was talking about earlier, for nation states to come in. And across all of this, really what you're getting back to is, and this happens with a lot of our customers that come onto our capability, the first phase is the surprise at how much is out there they didn't know about.
Yeah.
And that wasn't under their security umbrella. So I think that's such a critical aspect of this.
I do too. APIs is a great topic for us, and we love to talk about it. I want to talk a little bit though about something that we didn't really cover in the article, and that is AI specifically, and what we think AI is going to do to the overall threat landscape in 2025. We've heard a lot of really dire predictions, both on the terrible side, right, from the threat actor side. We've also heard some optimistic stuff about what it can do to help us on the stay safer side. I'm going to start with you, Tricia. What do you think that we might see with API, both in terms of from bad actors as well as from what we can do to stay safer?
Sure. I think AI, this whole topic introduces one of my favorite things to talk about, which is how the technical barrier to entry has lowered significantly for attackers and why that sucks. So the AI has offered an ability for someone who may or may not actually know how to code, create a very legitimate threat, whether that be in a phishing site, which everybody likes to talk about, writing phishing emails, etc., but also changing code and something that is even scarier. I think this is the one that I really would like to focus on moving into 2025 is prompt engineering. So you may have seen even job descriptions for looking for prompt engineers. And it is going to be a very legitimate.
And tell us what those are, though, because this is interesting to me.
Sure. Yeah. So a prompt engineer is somebody who gets really, really good at writing prompts to go into large language models to spit out effective information. As you can see, this could be very useful as people are continuing to use LLMs within their business and they're looking for something specific. That's a very, very valuable skills to have. And if you're looking for something to learn in 2025, I would highly recommend looking into prompt engineering. But anything that can be used for good can also be used for bad. And here we are. So while there are guardrails in place, you can't just jump into ChatGPT and say, hello, could you please write me a malware that will steal all of the money?
Right.
It will not allow you to do that. But you can ask around it. And
there you go.
You can ask around it. My partner said something really funny. I think it's so true. He goes, ChatGPT is just a child with infinite time. and infinite patience. And it's like, oh, wow, yeah, that's exactly true. You just ask it a question and it will answer as best it can, or it'll make something up. So, yeah, prompt engineering, I think, is going to be it's going to be a really big threat moving forward, because all of these things are getting interconnected. So if you can, in fact, external, you don't have to access the network, you don't have to get in, you can prompt engineer one of these LLMs and they will give you the answer that you were looking for potentially, or at least give you a new something to think about whenever you're trying to attack a company. So yeah, prompt engineering is the one thing I would really look into for 2025.
All right, Steve's foaming at the mouth here, man. We got to give him the mic.
Well, and it's funny, you talk about jailbreaking legitimate ones, but there are sites out there called Fraud GPT.
Yes.
That are malicious on day one.
Yeah.
So I think there are both. So really, as I talk about AI, I want to do one of three things. The first thing I want to do is I want my employees to be safe. We've had incidents of employees putting proprietary information into a public large language model, and it becomes part of the training model and is no longer, the next person writing code may be pulling part of your proprietary code.
Yeah.
And there are abilities to say don't include in training models and have private large language models. So there are secure ways to do this, and then how do I make sure my employees are safe and using it appropriately? The second thing is, if I have a large language model, how do I protect it? And that's what the OWASP is doing, is how do I protect my private model that has my business competitive advantage information in it? And there are things like, here at Akamai for our Zero Trust platform, we've put natural query language into it. So our large language model is designed so that a junior analyst could say, hey, I just found out Log4j has a vulnerability. Where are we using Log4j on our network? And go discover, rather than, what Trish was talking about, a prompt engineer, a senior architect going in and designing that query to find it out in the network in the past. So we can empower our security force, just like she was talking about the threat empowering a junior hacker to be, a very senior malicious hacker. And
Roger?
then the final one is the one that Trish talked about.
All right. I'm sorry, Steve. I didn't mean to cut you off. I want to hear Roger's on this too, because it pulls directly into another conversation I want to have with Roger. I won't tell you what it is yet, though. Roger, what are you thinking around AI?
So I think probably in the industry, I'm one of those that say, we're using AI, the term, a little loosely. It's still ML frequently, and I know it's very attractive to say AI on those pieces, but the ML, the language ML type items that Trish and Steve are mentioning are very rare and are risks because of how you can just talk and attempt to find a weakness. But where it can help, going back to your original question of where it can help, Steve will tell you that his peers out there very afraid of API. I don't even know where my APIs are. Don't worry, I'm bringing this to AI. And they'll say, I don't know how many I have. We, with the customer's permission, did an overall scan of their environment, outside and inside. We found 84,000.
Yes. Back to my 400, right? It's like somebody telling me they have 400.
84,000. Oh my goodness, what a wonderful place for automation AI to go in, because what human or team are you going to tag with to go and say, well, did that scan just find something that gave a response, or is that a real API? And if it is a real API, how do I score it? And what I mean by that is how much information, how accessible. There's a million questions you can ask about where you would subsequently prioritize your risk register of what order you're going to subsequently look at those things. But that's where AI is going to be wonderful, because you could use that chat type capability to say, hey, scan these things. Here's the list of IPs. Tell me what you get as responses, and give it some detail on how it could know whether it's a real API or not, and then give it a score on what it could kick off subsequent tools to go in and see how real or how deep that API reaches. So that's a wonderful positive use case. It's going to be an escalating war, just like in any other situation, right? Where AI is going to be able to say, hey, I can automatically defend you. The bad people are going to, do the same thing. And it's going to, there's always going to be some one-upmanship. So forgive me, I'm going to talk about the opposite end of the scale of AI and say, this is why it's so important to have really skilled people available to you to be able to handle those situations where ML, automation, AI, all of these other pieces aren't there. If you're depending only on an automated response, and granted, automated response should handle 99.9% of things that are going on out there, you have to have some layer of human expertise to handle the exceptions.
Excellently said. I also want to now switch topics ever so slightly to another very, very Star Trekian technology that is coming fast, and that is quantum. You and I have talked offline about quantum multiple times, and I know you have a lot of opinions here, informed opinions, I should say. But you had a quote when I interviewed you that was a little Orwellian. Quote: "Quantum will potentially accelerate attacks in dramatic ways that the industry is not even yet prepared for." Close quote. So, talk to me about that. Number one. And number two, talk to me about what you would advise organizations to start doing right now. And that the question may actually be, what should they be thinking about right now first? But what should people do with what's coming, and what is coming?
Yeah, absolutely, Mitch. Thank you. So let me start off by saying, you have three vastly different disciplines on this call, right? The threat research, the CISO perspective, and then what do you see on the front lines going on, right? So I never, when I talk to people, try to sow fear, uncertainty, and doubt. I talk very much about what I see. So where we're going right now is an exception where
this is pretty blunt, and I think you need to be, though. I think you need to be here.
Right. And, so I'll be in front of FSISAC or RSISAC or different groups, and everybody's talking like we have been, AI, API, all of the traditional things that are, areas where enterprises need to really focus on what attacks are out there. And I usually close with something I genuinely believe is that we are so focused on the sexy new AI terms and capabilities out there, we are not thinking nearly enough about quantum. Why is that a concern? Well, hey, encryption today may take 123 years to break, but maybe 12 seconds to break when quantum comes out. So all of your, hey, I'm safe, I'm encrypted, I'm comfortable, is extraordinarily short-lived. This is happening in the next few years. It's out right now. It unfortunately is only right 90% of the time, right? So that's what's holding it back. It's not perfect yet, but that percentage rate is getting better and better and better over time. And if you have enough quantum capability, you can work out what's right by having multiple quantum attempts to crack an endpoint. So here's the concern. If you just run an IT department, simplifying this, imagine that every single piece of your hardware needs to be swapped out because it can no longer maintain speed to perform its job anymore. Imagine that every single piece of encryption, every single VPN, every single SSL cert endpoint is now useless in the reasonably near future because the amount of compute power to crack past that is there. And now, how does that affect your budget? So that's where I talk about, hey, CISOs out there, look at your budget, have that line item in there somewhere that says, I may need an extensive hardware refresh. Now, it's not all bad because today maybe you need 100 servers, maybe you need one in the future, but you got to start thinking about what is that future?
Steve, CISO perspective. Yes, let's go.
I will say that I worry about, depending on your industry, steal now and decrypt later. So one of the things that they've said is, now is the time to harvest the information that has a long shelf life and decrypt it later. And so if you're in an industry where, that proprietary information is going to be valuable for a long time, then if it's being stolen now and you're saying, I don't have to worry about crypto because that's in the future, well, if your information's out there, it's going to be decrypted in the future. So start thinking about implementing crypto protected stuff now. And the second is to what Roger said is now's the time to become, and I'm stealing another term from Richard in the blog. So this is not me. I give him full prompt or full credit, to be cryptologically agile, to think about what I'm going to have to do, how I'm going to have to change, where my risk posture is. It is time now to have your architects, have your policies, start to get ready, because when we do hit that tipping point, Roger's spot on. It's going to be a crisis, and those who have planned for the crisis will survive it much more gracefully than those who haven't.
Now, you talked about industries whose data has a long shelf life, right? Tell us who those are.
A lot of this is those that are heavily regulated.
I was thinking healthcare.
I was going to say, well, and I consider healthcare heavily regulated. Here is an example where things like, my healthcare information is going to change. Now, some of my insurance, which is where a lot of the value in healthcare is, might change. Some of the financial information isn't going to change long term. Manufacturing isn't going to necessarily change rapidly. So all of this, especially government information, military information, defense contractors, a lot of this, anywhere that you are protecting proprietary information, that's where I would consider this be a great opportunity to steal now and decrypt later.
All right. Thank you. Tricia, I want to talk a little bit about where research thinks we're going with quantum. And I know that's not something that we have talked about a lot internally, but I'm sure there's chatter out there. What are you hearing?
Yeah, I mean, the research community is just excited to break it. I think, which makes sense. That's what we like to do is break stuff and then write about it. It's pretty cool. Yeah, personally, I think this is a good time for companies, as Steve was mentioning, is to fundamentally re-look at your risk program. And because of course, having things encrypted is something we've been telling people to do for a long time, and people still don't encrypt everything like they should. It's still foreign to some entities, including end users, to use VPNs for things. And now we're talking about one thing that can break previously insurmountable amounts of information. So my brain breaks trying to think about quantum. Truly, it just breaks. I don't think I have the capacity to understand what the power of quantum. And I think that right there is that mentality is something that maybe a lot of people share and would make somebody shy away from it. No. Those types of things are the things you should be looking forward. You should be. I love the cryptologically agile also, Steve. I was going to say it if somebody else didn't. It was a great term that Richard put there, because we don't know what we don't know yet, but what we do know, we can prepare for. And then the researchers are here to break this stuff so that we can hopefully get more prepared.
All right. So this is a run towards the fire type of situation.
Absolutely.
You heard it here first. All right, guys, we are down to like 2 minutes, and I want to give each of you 30 seconds, 45 seconds to tell me the top thing that we should be focused on in 2025 from the cybersecurity realm. Steve.
Visibility across the entire life cycle of your data journey.
Visibility across the entire life cycle of the data journey. Okay. Roger.
Understand your critical vendors and what you expect of them, and make sure that they have a layer of human capability that augments the AI and other things and other services that you expect from them. It cannot be just one. You need both.
All right. Humans plus AI. Tricia, research side.
Assume breach and assume it at a scale you did not previously think was possible.
Wow. Okay.
Get your patch management in order.
You guys, thank you so much. I appreciate your time, and I appreciate your thoughts on this. Well, I think we're out of time. I was going to say any closing thoughts, but I think the whole thing has just been a great big success. again, I want to thank you both. Tricia Howard, cybersecurity research here at Akamai Technology, Roger Barranco, Vice President Security Ops, and Steve Winterfeld, our advisory CISO. Thank you for joining us today, and audience, thanks for participating and listening.